Cool.
Hello all. Good morning all, good morning all. That doesn't count if you didn't work Monday, but he did. So it is. Testing 1, 2, David Christopherly, Fiona Simpson, testing 1, 2, 3. The LNP is today releasing 87 pages of documents, text messages, emails that show the true state of the maternity crisis in Queensland. It's information that has been garnered not because the government is being open and upfront, but because the opposition has gone looking for them. It shows a culture of a government deliberately hiding the truth on the extent of the Queensland maternity crisis. The state government has trashed their credibility in fixing this crisis, and it has trashed its credibility on being open and accountable to Queensland people. These documents show the government see the Queensland maternity crisis as an issue that needs media management rather than about patient survival. It is deeply alarming. The documents reveal 4 things. It shows that the Mackay and Gympie maternity services were on the brink of closure, and Queenslanders were never told about it. It reveals the desperate attempts of the government to try to withhold any bit of information about the depths of the maternity crisis gripping this state. It shows the Health Minister's office lurching from crisis to crisis when it comes to managing Queensland health. Not our words, the Minister's office, their words. Crisis to crisis, when Queenslanders have never needed a world-class health system more than now. It shows a deliberate attempt to edit public correspondence that shows the government simply doesn't have a plan to fix the Queensland maternity crisis, and the extent that the Minister's office were prepared to go to keep that from the public. It is 87 pages that show a government lurching from crisis to crisis, a government that doesn't value integrity, and a government that sees the maternity crisis not as something that young mums are dreading, but as something that has political implications for their survival. That's when you know a government has given up on listening. Good morning, Fiona.
Thank you. The integrity crisis shows that when the government gives up on integrity, they're giving up on governing for Queenslanders. These texts, this information shows a real window into the soul of this government, where they're more interested in spending huge amount of resources and time to manage the political fallout, looking for distractions in other jurisdictions, rather than putting that effort into actually having a fix to solve the problem, to keep mums and bubs safe. This government has been more interested in how it looks rather than how it is. And this is another issue with an integrity crisis that impacts on the safety of mums and bubs. This government should have been focused most about the safety of Queensland mums and their babies rather than the safety of their own hides. This really is an insight into how they've dropped the ball and abused the trust of Queenslanders. I also want to address another issue, and this is in regard to the Jim Madden issue. The Premier knows that this isn't an issue for the Clerk of the Parliament. This is an issue for the Premier. The matters that have been brought out into the media aren't matters for the Clerk of the Parliament. They're matters for the Premier. And for her to once again try and flick past this and not take responsibility and not do her job is an example of how this government is actually going about ruling in Queensland. This government, whether it's a maternity crisis or other integrity issues, is more interested in covering up for themselves rather than being honest, being clean and having a plan to actually resolve these issues for Queenslanders.
Thanks, Fiona. Before I open it to questions, I might just make one quick point about the Property Council report from EY, and I thank them for putting that forward, because right now Queenslanders have never struggled more to put a roof over their head, and the government needs to look at every solution to do something about it. And we've put some of ours on the table, and they include infrastructure partnerships to enable more land supply to get young people into a market and afford to rent, a community housing partnership to unleash that sector, and for the Minister to be held accountable for the targets they set on social housing. Well, this shows that the government's also dropped the ball when it comes to delivering build-to-rent. And there are tens of thousands of Queenslanders languishing on a waiting list, and there could have been over 7,000 with a roof over their head tonight if the government had even kept pace with other states. That is a failure of a government to listen to solutions that have been put on the table. Over to you.
Just with the hospitals, the government's arguing that it didn't actually go to bypass, it could have spooked parents hearing this fact. What would you say to that?
Well, there's a city called Gladstone, and the parents and young families there have never been more at risk when it comes to delivering a baby in the city that they call home. And the government's asking those young mums to play Russian roulette and drive an hour to Rocky and risk having a baby on the side of the road. And I have sat and listened to some mums whose young babies have the name of a road, of a highway on their birth certificate. I'm sorry, but these documents show that the government doesn't feel the same level of pain that those young mums do. And it's time for the government to start being a little bit open and a little bit honest and acknowledge that this is a crisis, and it doesn't need media management. It needs patient fixing, and it needs to put the patient front and centre of what they do.
Are you worried about other HHSs falling over?
Deeply. And this report shows that there are other large centres at risk of closure. And in its time in office, this government has now closed several dozen maternity services, and they're not bringing them back. And there is a way that you can do it, and it was proven in that brief window between 12 and 15 where there were maternity services brought back to country areas. And young women deserve to have a baby in places where they have given birth for generations. And a city of the size of Gladstone, think about what that community contributes to the economic well-being of this state. Think about how many young mums give birth in that region and have done for generations. And the fact that the government doesn't believe that a city of that size should have what they have had for generations shows that they are losing control of the Queensland health crisis. And it shows that both the Minister and the local member have set themselves targets that they quite frankly haven't met. And for the Minister's own office to describe their behaviour as lurching from crisis to crisis is truly a window into the soul of this government.
How much of a role do you think a COVID backlog has played in this and the inability to attract decent doctors to the regions?
In the last 35 years, this government's been in power for about 30 of them, and nearly 40 maternity services have been closed under their watch. 4 have been reopened, and every one of them were in a brief window when the LNP were in government. So the government will always try to blame everyone else for their failures. And in this report, it actually shows that the Minister's office spent resources going to look for someone else to blame to try to be able to point to another jurisdiction not being able to do services rather than focus their energy on trying to fix the problem. Doesn't that tell you everything you need to know when governments reach the end of their time of listening to people and trying to govern for the interests of people rather than the survival of the government? They diverted resources from the Health Minister's office to try and find examples that could be used to distract, rather than go and look for other jurisdictions for solutions to heal the crisis. That'll do me. Sure. By doing the things that Ros Bates has spoken about whenever she's gone around Queensland, and these are solutions that have been put forward by the clinicians themselves, but also the local HHSs. And we truly do need to empower them to make decisions, and we do need to make sure that the funding matrix goes back towards giving the money to those HHSs. That's the starting point. But we also have to get serious about attraction packages, and not just for the doctor, but for his or her partner as well. That's part of the that's part of the deal that needs to occur. We need to look at how we can provide training for people when they move to a regional area. How can we fast track them into other professions? How can we look at giving them a fast track into different areas of surgical expertise? They're all things that we can put on the table. But one thing's for certain, when a government spends every waking hour trying to deal with hiding the truth and managing the media of a crisis, rather than standing up and saying, we have a problem and this is how we're going to solve it, you never will solve those problems. And these documents show the way that the Minister's department and her office were conducting themselves. For the Minister's office to describe their conduct as lurching from crisis to crisis, that is next level in a government that truly has given up on trying to fix what they have overseen. And on every health metric, and I've stood before you many times and spoken about waiting lists, the waiting list for a waiting list, ambulance ramping that's gone from 15 to 41%. On every metric, you can see the slide year on year for the 8 years of this government. And they will try to blame a surge in numbers and Canberra and COVID and all manner of excuses. But in the end, the Minister's own office now knows that they are lurching from crisis to crisis. The only thing you didn't know is they weren't prepared to tell Queenslanders. It took the opposition to get this through right to information to show the way that they tried to paper over the Queensland maternity crisis. That does no one any favours whatsoever.
You mentioned McLean in here.
Well, the document shows that, and Queenslanders were never made aware of that. And we know...
But as of now, they're okay.
Well, you'd have to ask the Minister, but whether or not the Minister would be open and honest and admit that the Queensland health crisis is lurching from crisis to crisis under her office. If the first thing the Minister says when she stands up, and hopefully it is today, if the Minister has to admit whether or not that's a factual statement, and if not, well then what evidence is there to the contrary? So that's the first point. But the Minister has to finally reveal why these maternity services were in the gun, and why weren't Queenslanders told, and what steps have been put in place to make sure that they don't close. Because I do not accept, as someone who was born in a very small country town a long time ago, I do not accept that places like Mackay and Gympie should not be guaranteed the ability to have a baby. And I certainly do not accept that a young mum in Gladstone, a city the size of 60,000, can't choose where, when and how they need to have a baby. And to somehow suggest that a drip feed of services returning to a city of that size is a solution. Gladstone mums have been able to give birth where, when and how under those terms for generations in that city. And
So are you saying the government should be open about when perhaps a crisis...
of course. Of course.
If they've solved it, though, they've
Well, if you read the report, it shows the scramble of the government to try to maintain services in large centres. Now, we've never been told that. Queenslanders have never been told about the true state of the maternity crisis. Never. It took the release of these documents under right to information to reveal that to Queenslanders. And this goes to the heart of the problem in Queensland Health under the Minister. You will never repair a crisis if you're saying one thing behind closed doors and then fronting up and saying nothing to see here. These documents show how deep the crisis is. It shows the Minister's office using the word lurching from crisis to crisis. And yet the Minister will stand up every day and tell you there is nothing to see here. You will never fix that. And as for the Premier, it's about time the Premier takes interest in her job again and starts focusing on holding ministers accountable. We constantly see changing positions. We've had another one today with Minister Bailey, where we have a changing position within 48 hours, a government that's in complete chaos. What confidence does that give Queenslanders at a time when they have never needed confidence more? We live in a period of real economic instability. And I spent yesterday in Bundaberg, and to hear the real concerns from small and family business about rising costs, declining trade. I listened to a business yesterday who told me the story about having to reduce the hours of one of their casual staff members and how that impacted that young mum from being able to keep a roof over her head, and she's had to leave the business. Now, they're real-world issues, and somehow the government's given up on those things. They've given up on trying to find solutions for young mums. Yeah. Sure, Melina. Directly with an HHS wanting to explain that the government didn't have a plan to fix something, and the Minister's office circumvented that publication. That's alarming.
Do you know the status of Gladstone?
Yes. Gladstone is still not back to the service level it was nearly 300 days ago. And the government keeps on trying to put out press releases on a fortnightly basis, saying that they are trying to deliver a service to a region of 60,000 people that is inferior to the one that they have had for generations. And somehow they want the mums of Central Queensland to say thank you. There is no thank you for a substandard service that sees young mums playing Russian roulette on the side of a road going to another hospital. Gladstone is an economic powerhouse of this state, and young mums deserve to have babies in places like Gladstone and in Chinchilla, by the way, that we haven't heard peep from the government, and that is a long time on bypass.
Do you welcome CQ Health saying that from April 12 of today, no risk birthing services will be available at Gladstone Hospital? We anticipate that this will halve the number of transfers to Rocky and
Mums in Gladstone deserve the right to have a baby where, when and how they choose. And until that full suite of services returns to that city, the mums of Gladstone will not be thanking the government for drip feeding services back into the community.
just on another issue, have you decided whether you'll campaign yes or no?
I will continue to take my time and listen to the cases put forward, and I think I'm probably in a similar place to many Queenslanders in that. There are a lot of people who haven't made their mind up on how they intend to vote, and I have just said two things that I'm really want to see. I want to see the debate conducted with civility, and I saw that yesterday from Julian Lesser. Civility, decency, and the second thing is I want people to be open-minded and absorb the information that's put forward.
There's to have a debate where you have to have an opinion and you have to check rules.
Well, because I'm still taking my time to form it. And I think you know my style. I don't go off half-cocked on things. I never have. I haven't with legislation before this place. And by doing that, I think Queenslanders know that in me they're not going to see the shambolic nature and the chaos that has unfolded in this third term of this government. I am considered and I do take my time. And there isn't a vote tomorrow. It's many months away. And there's still a parliamentary report that has to come back. There were some excellent suggestions put forward yesterday, and I would urge the Prime Minister to listen to them. And it's not just me asking for more information. The Premier is asking for more information. So there are a lot of people who want to see Queenslanders given the opportunity to cast their vote having listened to everything that's been put ahead of them. And I can assure you, I am one of those Queenslanders. I am no different to anyone else in taking my time, who are taking their time. Now, I understand there are people with passionate views on both sides, and provided they can put forward their cases in a decent manner, I will listen to them. But I am going to take my time, and I am going to wait to see the final composition of everything, including that report, back to the Canberra Parliament.
I guess a lot of people, not everyone, though, look to elected members.
I understand that.
See where they stand. You mentioned the Premier's asking more information.
Yeah.
She's no person.
That's okay. Yeah, and the difference between the Premier is she's overseen a chaotic government and I've overseen a unified opposition that's been focused and reformed. So that's the first point I'll make. But I won't begrudge the Premier making a decision, nor anybody. There will be people who have formed their opinions. But there is a whole heap of Queenslanders who haven't yet. And I'm urging those people who haven't to be open-minded and to absorb the information that's put forward. And if there was a vote in the next week, you could justifiably say, well, you know, it's time for you to put across your position. But there's still a long way to go. And I do want to be open-minded. And I hope by doing that, I set an example to Queenslanders who haven't made up their mind that they will take the time to absorb it. It's a big deal. Changing the Constitution is something that is a privilege that isn't afforded to you every day. I've only been able to vote once in my time. I think it was in the late 90s. So you've got to be considered with this, and I will be doing that. It's not a matter for the state parliament, so that the answer to that is clearly that people form their own opinions. But I've just asked my team to do exactly what I'm urging everyone to do, and that is be civil in the discussion, regardless of what your position is, and there will be people with differing views, of course. Be civil in it and take the time to be considered with it, and we'll be better for it as a nation and as a state if we do.
I agree with what the leader said, that I think there's a lot of people who want to have information, want to have a civil... It's not just a debate, it's actually a dialogue and a discussion. And that means that people must be safe to ask the questions, have their answers met to inform their view. And I think that there are obviously people with strong views on either side of this debate. Concerningly, I think there are a lot of people who feel frightened to ask questions and be heard about those questions in case they get branded and they get shut down. And when talking about changing a constitution, I think a respectful dialogue, not just a debate, shooting from two hilltops with people in the middle, is going to help have that done in an informed and careful way. So I think we do need to encourage people to have that dialogue, have that information, and not feel scared or branded if they might have a different view from other people in the community. And that is a concern I have at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much.